There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play? They're here.
Welcome to the Horror God.
Hello there, horror fans. It's Gary here bringing you a quick little bonus episode. I had the pleasure of sitting down with Justin Raleigh, who was the head of special effects makeup on The Conjuring. Justin has worked on many films including Women in the Yard, Maxine, Saw 10, Insidious, and that's just naming a few. So it was a pleasure to discuss his time on The Conjuring and talk a little bit more about the horror genre in general. So please, enjoy.
Right, it's 9:18. We're headed down into the cellar where the doors just opened on its own. Give us a sign that you want to communicate with us.
Hi Justin, and thanks very much for joining us. For our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the films you've worked on?
Yeah, so I've been a makeup artist for 30 years and a special makeup effects designer for about 20 of those years. I've had my own company for about 20 years at this point. I originally started with Stan Winston Studios, and I worked for ADI and Steve Johnson, and kind of did my rounds at a bunch of different studios before starting my own company in 2005. Since then, I have been involved with tons and tons of horror movies, a lot of sci-fi, a lot of kind of a mixed bag, really. Specialty costumes, like I did all the superhero costumes for the Zack Snyder movie Watchmen. We did all the illuminated suits for Tron Legacy. I did not do the new one. I passed on that one. But horror world, the entire Conjuring series, except for the most recent two. I didn't do part 3 or the new one that's coming out that'll sort of finalize the series. But I really established the majority of the characters for that with James Wan. Those have carried into other franchises like Annabelle, The Nun, all based on designs that me and my team had created here at Fractured Effects. Fractured Effects has been, sort of my baby since 2010, so we're in our 15th year now. And one of our first films was a James Wan film. It was actually Insidious, which at that time was a super low budget movie, and has now become a 5-part series basically. So, and I've been involved with every single one of those films. Lots of different TV shows in the horror sci-fi world as well. Like we did the Westworld series, season 2 and 3, the Swamp Thing series, which unfortunately was canned at Warner Brothers, but incredible amount of very cool dark horror effects and creature suits, tons and tons of practical. So yeah, we've kind of run the gambit, a lot of different aspects of makeup effects and specialty costume and specialty props and medical effects. We also work with hospitals as well. So
Yeah. A lot of people who work in the horror industry might not necessarily be a fan of horror. Are you a fan of horror movies in general? What's your thoughts on the overall genre as well?
yeah, I don't. It's interesting. I don't watch as much horror as I used to, just because I think I'm so desensitized to it anymore, that it doesn't really like trigger that visceral experience that most horror fans go to see, and go to get that experience from. So for me, I love horror. I do watch it. I tend to still watch the films that I've worked on, of course, but I also try to stay, um, up on what's happening, just so I have a sense of what's happening in the genre still, as it evolves. But when I first got in the industry, I mean, horror. When I was a kid, I mean, I loved horror movies. I would go to the video store with my buddy, and We would select probably, 3 or 4 of the worst looking box covers we could find just to kind of watch the craziest, cheesiest little things that we could watch. And that was really what got me into makeup effects was horror movies. For me, what really made me want to be a makeup effects artist was The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, and The Exorcist, which just absolutely scared me to death as a kid. Growing up in a fairly religious sort of family, it was quite intense. And then come to find out that Max von Sydow's character was in old age makeup. It really just sort of triggered a much broader view of what makeup effects could be. And then I started to do a lot of research on Dick Smith and then Rick Baker and Rob Bottin and all the guys that were creating these things at the time, Stan Winston, of course. And really, I think in junior high, I really went like, how do I do this as a career? And pretty much by the time I was 16, I was already working as a makeup artist professionally. I was working in a photography studio and working with some photographers, just doing beauty makeup. I had a girlfriend's mother who was a photographer, and she's like, I know you love all the blood and guts and all that horror stuff, but if you learn how to do beauty makeup and some hair, I'll hire you. And it was really good paying job, and I just went to it. So like the first 3 or 4 years of my career were predominantly focused on beauty. And then I eventually kind of took an internship on a low budget movie and kind of cut my teeth there, and that led to teaching at a makeup school at Joe Blasco Makeup Center, where I couldn't afford to go to a makeup school, and ended up getting my diploma basically as an assistant teacher, and that led to working at Stan Winston's, and then the rest is sort of history that I've already explained. So
No, that's great. That's great. To bring it to The Conjuring, I would say The Conjuring, other than the supernatural elements, it's quite a grounded movie. Everything else feels really real. So how do you approach the makeup elements to keep that feeling grounded? So, for instance, something I guess like other than the zombies, The Walking Dead feels, well, when it first started, felt very grounded as well. That was the one thing it took it out. So how did you approach that when it came to The Conjuring?
it's a great question. So when I came on board, James Wan and I had already done Insidious, and then Conjuring came around, and he sent me the script. And I didn't know, I mean, I knew a little bit about the Warrens and I knew a little bit about their history. But he sent me all this research material, all this really in-depth documentation that he had received from the Warren family. So I was able to do a lot of research, really kind of dig into the descriptions that she and Ed had put together. And James had already started doing some concept work with a concept designer by the name of Aaron Sims, and Aaron and I went back to Stan Winston, so we had a good working relationship already, and the designs were already fairly grounded, but James he can have a bit of a stylized look to a lot of things that he does, and with that, I would say that the makeup design initially was a little more garish in a way. It had a more, I don't want to say monochromatic, but it had a much more pale white face sort of pallor to it, where it really had almost like a made up Betty Davis kind of creepy looking vibe to it. All the detail, the texture, all the look with the broken neck, like all that stuff was within the design. And for me, reading the script and then seeing the tone of filming, I kind of nudged James away from that direction a little bit. I did a test makeup and I said, here's kind of like the foundation of like what I think the skin tone should look like. Like we agreed on the anatomy, all the anatomy looked great. And that was, between my team and Aaron Sims' concept design and James's direction. It was really that kind of, do we make her look made up? Do we put makeup on top of Bathsheba to give this kind of pale face with, more hollowed out eyes, more kind of vibrant red lips and things like that? And what I decided to do is show him a version that was like, all right, let's take some of those colors, but now let's bring it into reality. Let's give it a sense of real decomposition tones. So the pale skin tone is a little more yellow, waxy, sort of corpse-like in a way.
Mhm.
There's a little more vascularity happening underneath the skin tones. You know, instead of the big red lips, it's more of kind of a broken, mottled looking, almost like lividity or something around the mouth. And we tested that, and then we tested the real kind of bright, garish look on top of it. And ultimately, he landed with the more realistic look because it just seemed to fit the tone of the movie that he was making.
Mhm.
And a similar thing actually happened on Conjuring 2. We had a with the Crooked Man character, we actually had a far more whimsical character. Well, even the nun, which was originally a demon. There was two characters that we did that were far more fantasy-like, and we ended up redesigning them and changing them after we built them to fit the tone of the movie a little bit more.
Right, right, yeah. Since like I guess even the 60s right through, horror fans love practical effects more than CGI. Why do you think that is? Because I feel like, maybe early 2000s we started going a little bit more CGI, and then over the last few years we're going back to like great practical effects.
I'm a fan of both. I'm not anti visual effects. I kind of tend to come at it with an understanding of our limitations of what we can do practically,
Mhm.
and let's pick and choose our battles. So let's try and get, if the design allows it, let's try and get 90 to 95% of that on camera, and then give it a little kiss of visual effects if we need it,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes that ratio changes a little bit based on the design, but that's always my goal. Let's get as much in camera as possible, and then we can augment a little bit. And I think that's the methodology that a lot of visual effects supervisors have realized as well, is that if you can get something in camera, you can get real ambient, practical, interactive lighting, and you have interactive, real reactions from performers. You're just going to get something that's far more realistic.
Yeah.
And there's still something about visual effects in how it's rendered. It doesn't, even the biggest budget stuff, it's still, there's something still lost in reality there. It still feels slightly false. I think the human eye is just really trained to be able to look at what is real. And we've all seen, especially anything that looks human, right? Like you can immediately recognize if there's something synthetic about it. Um, so I think more and more, that's kind of the blend that we've seen over the last decade plus,
Yeah.
maybe the last 15 years, is the shift to like, let's get as much in camera as possible. Ultimately, it's cheaper for production to have that, or I mean, visual effects is incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
So if you can save a little bit, you can have real things that are in camera, and then you can augment a little bit. That budget margin is much more palatable for the production, but also it just gives a visual benefit, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's been our approach for most of our films in the last 15, 20 years. I feel like I've been lucky to work with directors like James Wan, who really does want to try and have practical elements there, physical elements in camera, and he really pushes for that. But he's also smart. He does recognize like where our limitations are as well.
Yeah, yeah. For me, I always get scared using like CGI because I feel in like, 10 years, the human eye is going to kind of catch up to that, and it's just going to start to like, we're going to start to lose it a little bit, whereas I think practical just can hold up that little bit longer as well.
And unfortunately, with AI coming in right now, AI is really going to shift that quite
Mhm.
rapidly.
Yeah,
And it will start pulling more and more work out of makeup artists' hands and out of visual effects artists' hands, just because the AI machine learning tools can really do a great job at a lot of this, and it's much cheaper
yeah, yeah,
and much faster.
yeah.
So fortunate, but it's the reality. Pandora's box is wide open. So.
Mm, yeah. Was there a particular design or moment in The Conjuring or the rest of the universe, I guess, that was quite challenging to create? Is there anything that you remember going, that was a pain, but I'm glad we got there?
Uh, I feel like The Conjuring was relatively straightforward, the first Conjuring.
Hmm.
Once we had Bathsheba dialed in, which I don't know if you're aware or your fans are aware, that's a male actor in that makeup, Joseph Bashara, who's also the composer,
Yeah.
is wearing that makeup, and he was also the red-faced lipstick demon in Insidious.
Right.
So I've worked with Joe quite a few times in makeups, and he's a great guy. Um, so that was an interesting challenge in itself when James was like, "Hey, I think I want to use Joe again, for this design." I was like, "Okay, but it's a woman. Okay, all right, let's figure it out." So that was once we kind of had the aesthetic wrapped around him, we made it work. But it definitely we had to do a lot of anatomical changes to him to make him look feminine.
Mhm.
So that was a little bit tricky. Really, I would say bigger challenges came in the second movie, in Conjuring 2. The Crooked Man was quite a challenging critter. And it's one of those things that went through. We had this huge whimsical sort of design that we did with it, with a big animatronic head, and then ultimately it got scaled down to a makeup. And for the same reason, it was like it needed to become grounded. Like I think James had a vision that this whimsical character, because it's through a kid's eyes lens, we're looking through the kids seeing this thing, that having this whimsical, almost goofy sort of looking thing, very much like, like the doll in Poltergeist or something like that, that it would work. But I think once we did it, it had kind of just pushed a little too far into the whimsy,
Mhm.
and ended up dialing it back and keeping the costume, keeping a bunch of the other elements, and then just converted it into a makeup. And the same thing with the demon within that originally that was a full creature suit. We did a full on Joe Bashara as well, full creature suit and animatronic head, and there was supposed to be this huge reveal of this giant demon with visual effects wings and all this kind of stuff. And he shot all of it, and then in reshoots we ended up he just again, it felt too whimsical, it felt too big for this very grounded movie. And we ended up going back in and redesigning that character, which ultimately became the nun that we see. Much more simplified sort of character, far more grounded. And then that has now had its own franchise that spun off. Same thing with Annabelle. That's really all spun into its own thing, which we did. Annabelle Comes Home,
Mhm.
which established. We were brought. It seems like anytime we're brought in, anytime they want to establish new critters in the franchise.
Yeah.
So, like in that one, we redesigned the sort of black demon that was within that, which Alexander Ward wore, and then we also did like a ferryman character for that. And it's quite a few elements in that one, which was really fun.
I guess just on that, what would you say is the key ingredients to like designing a truly like unforgettable monster? Because sometimes I guess it could like become over the top or too cheesy.
Yeah, I'm kind of a less is more person. Like I look, I like going crazy and doing really elaborate sort of things, but even those, I feel like my sensibilities tend to lean towards realism as much as possible, and trying to keep it grounded, and trying to find something subtle, even if it's a very like elaborate design. Like how, like for example, like a lot of times we've done these kind of black on black characters, like dark environments, very black skin, and it's a way to take something that's really elaborate, kind of make it disappear, and make the audience forces the audience to create their own visual in their head a little bit. And my thing with horror, it's always less is more, in my opinion. The more and that's taking out like stuff like the Terrifier, which is just pure gore,
Yeah.
and it is there for shock. It is, it's the of the hostile sort of world where it's just kind of gore porn basically.
Yeah.
Um, you take those, put them aside, but I think any like real grounded, very very scary horror film, a lot is left to the audience, and you only show little blips where you need to, and then you finally give them a good reveal at some point. Otherwise, like if it's constantly there, you have time to scrutinize it, and it takes you out of your own psychology, which is really the scariest part. That's why you're there. You're trying to kind of unroot these deep feelings that are in yourself. And if you don't give the audience that, and you just give them everything, you lose the audience, in my opinion. So I always try and design a way that it's kind of pushing stuff into the shadows, forcing an illusion that makes the audience really seek out what it is, and they kind of create their own vision to it to a degree, and then you finally show it to them.
Yeah.
So
One of the scenes that we speak about in the podcast episode is when the young girl is saying there's someone standing in the corner of the room, but we never actually truly see anyone, it's just shadow. And you almost doubt, is there something there? You start looking at the shadows more, wondering if there is something there.
Yeah, I think that type of stuff is really important in horror, of just like forcing the audience to create their own vision.
Mm.
You know, 'cause everyone has those moments where, especially when you're like a kid, you're laying in bed and you're looking around your room and you see some weird shadows and it freaks you out. So if you can kind of bring back those visceral experiences in a visual way, like I think everyone tunes into that.
Yeah. Was there any over history, horror history, was there any practical creature effect that you loved as a kid, or maybe there was something that you wish you had the chance to work on after seeing it? Is there anything that sticks to mind that you're like, oh, I wish I got that gig, or I wish I designed that?
There's a lot of those, to be honest. Like, I mean, for me, like, it's not really horror, but it's sci-fi horror. Is like, I'll go back to The Thing. That's one of those movies that is so iconic, and for me, completely changed, my course in history. Like that film, I made me really start doing the research of like how to become a makeup effects artist. And Rob Bottin was a true genius of the '80s. He did so many incredible films and so many amazing effects. I when I was younger, I always wanted to work on like an alien film, which I did. I ended up working on Alien versus Predator, unfortunately, but I did get to. Yeah. It was before I had my own company. I worked with Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff at ADI, and I was one of their lead artists on that film, which it was fun. It was a fun experience. But no, I think if I had an opportunity to do a really good like Exorcist type film, something that's really grounded, very, very scary, very visceral. Like I would love to be involved with something like that. I'd love to do another Bram Stoker's Dracula type film, something like that. Greg Canham did incredible prosthetic work. His team did incredible prosthetic work on that. And to work with somebody like Gary Oldman in all those prosthetics too would just be, an amazing experience. So yeah, I would say something like that. If I could have a Bram Stoker's Dracula type, Francis Ford Coppola type film, that would be a dream job for me.
Perfect. We're just coming to the end here, Justin. I just wondered, is there anything in the pipeline that you can tell us about? Anything coming up that you can speak about or you're excited about? If not, that's absolutely fine as well.
Yeah, unfortunately with NDAs, I can't really say much, but there are some fun films coming out. There's some we just had not a horror film, but we just had the new Accountant movie come out with Ben Affleck, and we did some really fun character makeup stuff in that. So it's worth a peek to check out that one. And I think it just came out here last Friday. So
nice. And my last question for you, and it might be one that you've already mentioned, but what is your favorite horror film?
Favorite horror film? Honestly, my favorite horror film is the original Exorcist, the William Friedkin Exorcist. Yeah. To me, it still gives me chills. Like again, talking about grounded films, that's an incredibly grounded film. And that's what to me makes it incredibly scary.
Yeah. Well, Justin, thank you very much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare, huh?
We're friends to the end, remember?
This is the end, friend.